On behalf of the Borlaug Global Rust Initiative, it is my very great pleasure to welcome you, the BGRI International Community of Hunger Fighters, who are attending this 3-day virtual BGRI workshop. The Borlaug Global Rust Initiative's ongoing mission is vital in addressing future challenges. Our issue space is to reduce the world's vulnerability to threats to wheat, particularly from disease and climate change, enhance world productivity to withstand global threats to wheat security, facilitate sustainable international partnerships to contain these threats, engage with farmers for a wheat secure world, and train the next generation of hunger fighters. So today it is my even greater pleasure to introduce and interview two of the very first Borlaug Global Rust Initiative visionaries, two people who dared to imagine the breadth and depth of the international consortium of scientists that could be engaged to fight wheat rust. Ronnie Coffman from Cornell University and Kahn from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. First, let me introduce Ronnie Coffman. With Jeannie Borlaug Lobby as chair, Ronnie serves as vice chair of the Borlaug Global Rust Initiative. He is a professor of global development, international professor of plant breeding and genetics, and director of international programs in the Department of Global Development at Cornell University. Ronnie served as principal investigator for the Durable Rust Resistant in Wheat project from 2008 to 2016, and the Delivering Genetic Gain in Wheat project from 2016 to 2021. These were global collaborative efforts to fight biotic and abiotic stresses and deliver greater genetic gains to wheat. In 2013, Ronnie was awarded the inaugural World Agricultural Prize for his work enhancing international agriculture and development. Ronnie's early work in plant breeding has been important to the development of improved rice varieties that are grown on several million hectares throughout the world. Ronnie's PhD is from Cornell University, and his thesis research was supervised by Dr. Norman Borlaug in Mexico. Ronnie was Borlaug's only graduate student, and with him in the fields in Texcoco in 1970 when Dr. Borlaug learned he had received the Nobel Peace Prize. Welcome to Ronnie Coffman. And then I have the pleasure of introducing Kahn. Kahn is a senior program officer in the Agricultural Development Group at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, where she has worked since 2007. Kathy manages grants focused on crop improvement and discovery research, addressing the needs of smallholder farmers in sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia. This includes partnerships supporting innovation across crops, co-funded with the U.S. National Science Foundation, the UK Biotechnology and Biological Sciences Research Council, and the UK Department for International Development. Again, now it's called Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office of the UK. Kathy aims to foster more engagement and leadership from scientists based in African national agricultural research programs across all these grant-making partnerships. She trained as a plant biologist. She has a PhD in molecular biology and biochemistry. Her research focused on light harvesting and signal transduction in cyanobacteria, the molecular genetics of disease resistance and Arabidopsis, and virus resistance in cassava. Kathy is a dual national of the United States and the United Kingdom. And for Kathy, the Durable Rust Resistance in Wheat grant was the very first grant she made and managed when she joined the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation in 2007. The BGRI and many of you broke her in. Kathy was an amazing program officer, and we were very lucky to have her. So welcome, Kathy.
Thank you so much.
The Global Rust Initiative was launched by Dr. Norman Borlaug in 2005. Founding institutions were the India Council for Agricultural Research, two CG centers, ICARDA and CIMMYT, the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization, and Cornell University. Ronnie, can you talk about why Dr. Borlaug sounded the alarm and what was the global pandemic he was responding to?
Varieties that he helped develop going back as early as 1970 were still resistant to wheat rust. Then in 1998-99, we got this new race of UG99, which broke that resistance. People were, had become, they were really taking the resistance of the CIMMYT varieties up to that point for granted. So it was a big shock to the Dr. Borlaug and the world community. And he knew that he was one of the few people old enough to remember the severe destruction of wheat rust. So he was very concerned that this was going to turn into a global pandemic. He famously always said, rust never sleeps. So even though it was dormant for 30 years, when it came back, it was really galvanizing for Dr. Borlaug and for the international community. And the resources, the human resources, the financial resources were not in place. That was the other really concerning thing. Major countries such as the United States were, down to a couple of people that really had the expertise. The only country that had really maintained their expertise in a major way was Australia. And India too, to some considerable extent. So, one of the earliest challenges was to draw together that community. An instrumental person in doing that was Dr. Rick Ward, who at that time was employed by CIMMYT, and he made the first initiatives, and we built on that in approaching the Gates Foundation for funding.
So Kathy, from the donor perspective, why was the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation interested in addressing these challenges that Ronnie just laid out for us?
Yeah, well, at that time, we were a fairly new program in agricultural development at the Gates Foundation, and our focus was very much on helping smallholder farmers in sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia to increase their productivity so that those farmers could produce more to eat, more to sell, and get themselves and their families out of poverty. And so wheat is a tremendously important crop. And, this was a really urgent problem that Dr. Borlaug did bring to the foundation's attention. And so, it was something that we wanted to help support solving because it was an urgent problem. It was a really critical problem that could have had a lot of impact on hunger levels among people in low-income countries. And it was also a solvable problem. There was a strong research community that knew how to solve this. And so that was why we were really pleased to get involved and build on what a lot of other donors had already been doing for years. Like, I particularly want to mention how much USAID had supported CIMMYT, in their wheat program for many years. And so, as Ronnie said, more resources were needed. And so we were glad to get involved and help.
So the wheat project was really funded in 3 stages for 13 years, from 2008 to 2021, which is a remarkably long funded international partnership devoted to wheat. So Ronnie, talk about the various ways in which the BGRI successfully met the challenges related to developing the new varieties of rust-resistant wheat and distributing them to smallholder farmers. I mean, how did we do?
The obvious key was to bring together the community. UG99, of course, developed in Uganda in East Africa and was, really a major problem in Uganda and particularly in Kenya. So our Kenya partner, CALRO, the Kenya Agricultural Research Organization, as it was known at the time, was very key to the global wheat community. That I can't overemphasize how important their collaboration was, and we obtained the support there at the highest level of the Kenyan government. Established a major screening facility. This was widely utilized by the international community, particularly India. India represents and the surrounding countries represents the largest contiguous wheat growing region in the world. So our one of our big fears was that UG99 was going to jump from East Africa into that major wheat growing region before they were prepared for it. So it was very urgent to screen the material, to identify resistant varieties, to replace what some scientists call the rust suckers, the widely grown varieties in the subcontinent that were so vulnerable to UG99. So bringing the community together, cooperating to screen the material, getting resistant varieties out in front of UG99 was the key to the success. So I think a lot of people were involved. CIMMYT was quite central. CalRO was quite central. Expertise coming from all over the world, particularly our colleagues from Australia, Canada, South Africa, Europe. They were all very instrumental in this effort, and many of them provided, incredible contributions, coming to East Africa several times a year to help with the training of young scientists and evaluating the material. It was truly a global wheat community effort.
Kathy, reflecting on this model from a donor perspective, so what are some of the keys of the BGRI's success that we might think to apply in future programs dedicated to food security and plant breeding?
Yeah. I mean, I think listening to Ronnie describe that, one thing I'm reminded of is just how clarifying it is to have a common problem. So as a community, we were faced with this common threat, that the world's wheat supply was incredibly vulnerable to the rust disease. And that gave us something to coalesce around, right? If you cared about wheat breeding and wheat improvement, you had to pay attention to rust resistance. And this was a community that was coming together to focus on that. So I think, when you're dealing with a threat, it's really helpful to have that common coalescing shared mission among many diverse partners. That's certainly true for wheat rust. And I think it's true for future threats too, like the climate crisis. How can we look at something that's bigger than any of us individually, put aside our own egos and our own, kind of maybe more narrow focus areas and come together to solve a problem that really matters for the world. So I think that was really clarifying. And then I think the way that we approached it, I used to joke with Ronnie, because it's absolutely true, as you said, that the Borlaug Global Rust Initiative broke me in as a program officer. I didn't quite appreciate at the time quite how complex it was. But I used to joke that, there are 17 partners involved, and I think 14 of them want to lead it. But I think that was partly the way that Ronnie and Cornell led it, and trying to really give credit to everybody and make the focus be on the problem of what we were doing and not just on any one institution. So that very inclusive approach, that everybody was invited to be part of it. And that we really tried hard to ensure that we put front and center the farmers that we were trying to reach, which for us was those smallholder farmers. And the role that Ethiopia played became so much more critical as we worked together, because there's so many families in Ethiopia that depend on wheat. It's the biggest wheat producer, I think, in Africa. And so, really engaging with the scientists on the ground and the farmers on the ground in Ethiopia, I think was really important. But it went beyond that. There were lots of different national agricultural research systems that got involved. Ronnie's talked about the important role that India played. And then there were also regional partners with India, whether it was from Nepal or Bangladesh, or, who would come to the meetings and would present and would share what they were doing. And would share ideas. So that inclusive spirit, I think, is something that is absolutely critical when you're trying to address an important global agricultural problem or any problem. And then it wasn't just inclusive. Like I think we didn't pretend at being inclusive. I think the scientists that were involved with the BGRI were extremely rigorous, and the program managers we had. I'm thinking of folks like Sarah Ivanega, who, when she was designing the programs, was very rigorous. So you didn't just get to come and speak at a BGRI meeting because you spoke last year. You were invited to speak because you had something important to say, and the science that you were doing was rigorous. And we had, kind of internal peer review. I remember folks like Bob McIntosh used to spend hours reading the abstracts, reading reviews, and sending lots of comments. So for me, there was that sort of both inclusive on the one hand and rigorous, and this sort of common mission that we had together that, you know, I think has really been a remarkable experience for everyone that's been part of it.
It's true. It's good you mentioned Ethiopia, Kathy. They were really, you know, so key to the process, and the first really, I mean, so many vulnerable people and so dependent on wheat.
That's right.
It was really a crisis in the making in Ethiopia, and the Ethiopians themselves, especially, and the global community really came together. Lots of contributors from the U.S., Australia, Europe, everywhere came together to assist with that challenge, and they really rose up to meet it, changing over the varieties in a remarkably short period of time to cope
That's
with.
right. Yeah. No, and I think in Ethiopia, something that was quite remarkable was the leadership that we had from within the government system. So we had Dr. Badada Gurma, who stepped up to coordinate. And then we had, you know, a superb pathologist in the late Dr. Gitane Woldiab at AMBO, who was one of the first pathologists, I think, to show one of these complete life cycles do you remember, Ronnie, was that with one of the stem rust variants that they found in Ethiopia? But sort of excellent technical work. But then also we had a government leadership that was actually interested and sort of demanding of the scientists. So I remember at the time, the Director General of EIAR, I think was Dr. Solomon Asefa, and he came to us and said he wanted epidemiological models. I mean, I think it's the only time a policymaker has actually asked for epidemiological models, because he knew from his experience in the 1980s with wheat rust that they needed good ways to predict, like, where's the rust going? And then we've got limited resources to target it. We need to know where to apply them. And so for me, it was that combination of sort of technical excellence with really committed, passionate project management, you know, focused on the farmers, but also, you know, a supportive policy environment that wanted to protect and support the farmers. So that was a real privilege to engage with that as well.
Yeah, and I can't remember the particular name of the line, but Ethiopia and Kenya really collaborated closely to move seed of a resistant cultivar into Ethiopia in a timely way. That was an amazing effort at international cooperation.
Yeah, it's one of those kind of unusual examples where, you know, that helping your neighbor also helps you, because your neighboring countries, and if rust is going to take off in one country, you know, it's not going to stop at the border. So
absolutely.
Well, it's certainly a model for current pandemic work, I would say. But let's say, Ronnie, what makes you optimistic about the future in agricultural research?
Well, I think, you know, this project was a good example, which has been emulated in many ways by other projects. That just in the previous hour, I was working with the EPAC of Next Gen Cassava, which has brought together the cassava community from across Africa and other parts of the world. So what makes me optimistic is, you know, the success of bringing research communities together, the tools that we have, which, you know, even though this pandemic has been a real challenge, it has caused us to improve these communication tools, just like what we're using right at the moment. It's tremendous how it's been able over the past decade, how much more inclusive we've been able to be in bringing community together, and much of it is due to this technology. So, you know, the world's never going to be the same again. This is only going to get better, and the ability to work with each other toward the common good is really growing. So that's a big thing that makes me optimistic, is people understand the value of collaborating, and they're really stepping up to the challenge, scientists all over the world.
And I think we've also seen value in training young scientists and bringing more women into scientists, training them to various systems. Kathy, what do you see as some of the new directions for plant breeders and plant pathologists looking into the future?
Yeah, well, I agree both with you, Ronnie, and with you, Linda, about your reasons for optimism. The tools to collaborate, the desire to collaborate, the engagement, of more women in the research that we're doing, since the majority of the farmers that we're trying to reach are women, and so that's always been really important. And then I think I'm also really optimistic in terms of the science. And how much more we're understanding about, you could almost say, like, what makes plants tick, in terms of really understanding how do plants work, how do they capture the sunlight, how do they turn that into food, how do they partition it, how do they make relationships in the soil, for legumes with nitrogen fixing bacteria, all these really fundamental processes for how plants work that we're beginning to understand gives us the opportunity to really improve plants, to improve crops, so that they're much better adapted to a changing climate. They're much more resilient to the diseases like the rust threat, but also to higher temperatures and to less water. And so the science is really exciting and fantastic, the progress that's being made, in the last 10 years, whether it's the example that Ronnie gave of next-gen cassava, where you can apply tools like genomic selection to improve a crop like cassava that hasn't had that kind of dedicated, focused effort to really improve it. Or whether you can apply new techniques to identify how do you protect plants against diseases, and I think of some of the work that's going on now to identify so many more hundreds of sources of rust resistance that can be then incorporated into breeding. So I think in terms of the science, there's lots of reasons for optimism. And then at the end of the day, it so often comes down to the people too. And, reconnecting with the Borlaug Global Rust Initiative community, after some years away is really uplifting for me, because it is a community that has contributed so much, and that I hope goes on to contribute so much more as well, so that, farmers continue to benefit from this work.
But if you think about the big challenges, the one Kathy mentioned there, the big one that I see in the future is heat. I mean, especially for wheat. I mean, we know that for every 1 degree centigrade, you lose a ton per hectare approximately in yield. This is going to be a huge issue going forward. It's just amazing to see how crops are moving north already. I mean, I was just seeing figures yesterday. There are 12 million acres of soybeans being grown in Canada. When I was young, you couldn't grow soybeans even in the northern U.S. And now there's big acreage in Canada. I was reading that's also happening in Siberia. Soybeans are being produced for the Chinese neighbors in Siberia. But the downside is the permafrost is thawing. All kinds of issues are arising there. So plenty of challenges ahead for the global research community in wheat and other crops. But the tools are coming, as Kathy says, to deal with it. So
we've got to pay attention. We've got to pay attention and adapt.
Exactly. Adapt. That's the big strength of plant breeding is adaptation. We have two big options with climate change: adaptation and mitigation. And we plant breeders, we have the adaptation challenge, and that's one we need to focus on.
Kathy, do you think donors are keyed into this? What do you think their response is going to be?
Yeah, I mean, I do think donors are paying attention. We talked about, well, what could be like, what could what do we need to continue to doing? What do we need to stop and start doing? I think it's really important for donors to pay attention to agriculture and to agricultural research, because it is so critical, you know, to the billions of people who rely on agriculture. I mean, we all need to eat, right? So I think, keeping agriculture front and center for those donors that are already funding, and encouraging others to step up and really support agricultural research to benefit farmers around the world is absolutely critical.
And I think one thing we need to emphasize in this whole discussion is the central role of CIMMYT in wheat improvement. CIMMYT was Dr. Borlaug's great legacy. They've been a success for 70 plus years. The donors and all of us need to be careful in conserving, what is really so valuable in for the role that CIMMYT plays. I'm concerned that as we emphasize some of the modern breeding techniques, that the very productive capacity that's been in place there for so many years could be eroded. So I think we just need to emphasize the importance of CIMMYT and do what we can to support it going forward.
All right, thank you both very much for joining us today for this conversation. I appreciate it so much.
Thank you, Linda. It's really a pleasure.
Yeah, thanks, Linda. It was wonderful talking with you.
And from here, we're going to entertain some questions from the audience that Matt Hayes and Maricelis will moderate. And then that will wrap up this event of the Conference on Global Resilience, Science, Epidemics, and the Future of the Wheat Community. Thank you.